Oh, looks like I've got 1 sec. There we go. They gave me a very fancy audio video setup in my new office here in Halifax, so I have to use the correct cameras or they get mad at me. What I'm going to do, I am not actually a data scientist, but I'm really good at using Google. So I'm going to show you guys kind of a quick story about how we ended up building Koi over the last year. We actually launched Koi about a year ago, almost exactly. So here, without further ado, it's a story. Koi is now about a 25-person company. We're building essentially an on-ramp to decentralization. So the gist of this, it started out as intentionally as a tool to make it easier to get into crypto. And now what we've ended up building is sort of a layer N network that sits on top of all of the other blockchain networks out there. We're a lot less interested in the financial side of things and a lot more interested in the kind of how do you build a decentralized network that has no trust and no central authority. We've basically started building we've essentially built out a very small node that you can run on almost anything. So we actually, now the current goal is to build it and get it to run on one of these, which compared to one of these is very different, if you can see the difference. So these teeny tiny little phones, these each have a SIM card in them, and they'll actually end up acting as our nodes. So the thing that we've basically been trying to figure out though is how do we remix incentives? How do you get people to do things in an unusual way? Get them to run some code on their computers, kind of, how do you get them to actually participate in a very large decentralized network? Because that's kind of what it takes. And this is not a data science thing at all, but to give you a quick idea though, we'll take a step back. So Koi's about a 25-person company that we founded about a year ago, and it's been growing insanely fast. But it's actually the culmination of about like 8 years of work for me. And sorry, Matt, do you want to say anything else? Is there anything? Sorry, were we supposed to do an intro thing? I don't know how you guys usually do this.
No, it's all yours. Take it away.
Cool. Okay, so where I started out, I'm just going to do like a quick kind of background. I'm actually out here at the moment in Halifax. And sorry, by the way, for not being able to join last week or the week before. We had a conference in New York 3 weeks ago, and then one of our investors dragged us to Lisbon for a week, and then we went to Malta for the last week. So now I'm a little raspy because I caught some kind of not COVID. I got a negative COVID test, but some kind of a flu or something. So I started out here in Halifax. A whole bunch of people I knew were talking about Queens is a really great place to go to school. So came and hung out here in Kingston with you guys. After I graduated, I was in mechanical and robotics. So I played with a lot of these Next Lego robots in school. I don't know if you guys remember these. Some people have probably played with them a bit. We used to use them basically as the kind of first piece that you started using. Actually, Mindstorms is what they're called, these guys. So this is mostly what I did at Queens. Played with a lot of these guys and kind of built out a lot of really fun applications. At one point, we got one to play a piano. I was always really interested in how technology could be used to make more fun and exciting things. Because that's kind of the, you can build stuff that's really, really effective, or you can build stuff that really is eye-catching and is able to kind of stoke people's imaginations and get them to change how they use their lives, actually. And so from Lego robots, I got into PLC systems, which might sound like a big jump. These things are very, very old. This is kind of the original controller that they have in factories now. And a little bit of kind of high-tech camera systems integrated with these. So I did a lot of AI processing, kind of high-end training of machines. And I spent a lot of time in refrigerated cold rooms, which if you guys are not familiar, this is probably something you want to watch out for. It's not a good place to work. This is my first job out of Queens. So I was down in Chicago. And I don't know if there's a good, oh yeah, here's a good example. So basically, you get these giant factories that have the entirety of the inside of the factory is a giant cold room. So it's a huge fridge that you have to live and work inside of 24/7. So after doing that for about a year and automating, I think me and a team of like 3 people automated about 1,000 jobs in a year, just a couple little camera systems. So like all of the little quality control tasks they do at the end of the assembly line, we just put cameras in. And we interviewed a lot of people. We asked them how they did their jobs, and then we installed these little cameras. And by the way, sorry, it said this is a workshop, so I will probably talk for like 5 to 10, maybe 15 minutes about kind of where I'm coming from and how we got here. And then we'll do a little bit of stuff about blockchain and kind of talk through how blockchain development works and how kind of the pace of the industry is changing, and also how you can get in. Because it's actually really, really easy to add to what's happening right now. There's a lot of open source development. Everyone's kind of at the same time rapidly trying to one-up each other constantly. And if you can just get in there and write a really good white paper, you can get a lot of funding. A lot of funding in a good way. Like at the moment, we basically have a research team of about 20-ish people, and then we've got a team of marketing people, like 4 or 5 on top of that. Also a bunch of Queens grads in there too. So if anybody's interested in joining, we are really rapidly hiring at the moment. So anyways, back to cold rooms. So refrigerated cold rooms are not a great place to work. I was in this environment trying to figure out kind of like what I actually wanted to do. And I knew that a lot of the AI stuff that I've been working on, like very basic neural nets, that kind of stuff, was also very useful for marketing. So I started looking around in Chicago, and I basically went to, what's it called? I think it's called builtinchicago.com. Builtin Chicago. Something like this. There it is. So there's one of these in just about every city that you can imagine. And what they are is usually kind of job boards for local startups. So if you're in the tech space, or if you want to get into the tech space, you can go and you can basically find a whole bunch of people who are already in the tech space and want to hire kind of junior developers or people who want to get in. And usually what they're looking for is not actually like a high level of skill, but people who really just want to do something unusual. And so really what you do is you just go on there and you start sending people messages. So I think I sent about like 100 messages while I was traveling around, driving from one small town to the next, going into these cold rooms and putting in little cameras. And I was very interested in getting the tech space because every single day that I was in one of these cold rooms, I was like, okay, I really don't want to work in fridges anymore. This is cold. This is very unpleasant. And so I started submitting a lot of these applications. And most of the time, I would just go and look at the site. So I found one called Sharesale. And Sharesale is kind of like it's like a baby Google. So they have their own ad network. They've got all their own kind of affiliates and people who write blogs and things like that. And they write little tiny scripts that inject ads onto all those pages. And so I got in there with the basis of like, okay, this guy knows how to do neural nets. He'll probably be able to figure out some way to make our ad system better. But they put me in the support division. So I spent like probably 35% of my time answering phone calls from confused customers, and then about like 65% of my time, which progressively got larger because I automated a lot of my own job. And I got to kind of hang out and not, answer the phone calls from customers anymore, and instead spend a lot of time just kind of developing technology. And by the way, if you guys have questions while I'm talking, kind of to make this more of an interactive workshop, you can drop them in the chat and I'll try to reply as you go. So anyways, Sharesale gave me a chance for about 1.5 years to work on sort of JavaScript and get really good at web development because that's all that they did. And I had a chance to kind of look under the hood and see how the internet works, right? Because pretty much the entire internet is a bunch of JavaScript hooks that send information back and forth and then pay ads to people. That's kind of the incentive model of the web. That's how we're able to host all these sites. It's pretty much what drives everything. And again, very much not hard tech right now. But what that got me into is I realized that in addition to things like Builtin Chicago, you can also go to meetup.com. So if you guys aren't familiar with this, meetup.com is probably one of the best resources that you can get, or at least it used to be. With COVID now, it might be a little bit less fun. But essentially what this is you go on this site and you find a topic that you want. And then there's usually a whole bunch of people who are, a lot older and more experienced who go and hang out in a bar and they talk about this topic because everybody kind of is looking for somebody in their industry that they can hang out with. And so meetup.com allowed me to get into crypto because at the time, at least in Chicago, and actually we can see there's probably a whole bunch of Bitcoin meetups still in Chicago right now. So in Chicago, there are also all kinds of other meetups. So I went to a lot of AI, ML meetups. I went to a lot of different kind of like web development meetups, tried to basically just go and talk to lots of cool people and see what their careers were like. Because I realized that I didn't want to do the robotics thing anymore, and I definitely didn't want to work for Sharesale forever. So you kind of just start going to these things in the evening, kind of start talking to people. And a lot of them are trying to scam you too. So I went to a lot of these meetups and there was like some guy who kind of knew about Bitcoin and he was like, hey, I know how to buy Bitcoin. You're going to want to buy Bitcoin so that you'll get rich one day. And you just don't talk to that guy. You talk to his friends or the people that show up or, whoever else is there. And it's not that bad. It sounds kind of crazy, especially if you're an engineering-minded person. At the time, I was really not very sociable. So I just kind of walk into these events and go and try to say hi to a couple people. And sometimes it didn't go very well because you'd just say something weird or you'd ask a weird technical question and it would turn out the guy was like, a marketing aficionado and he had no idea what I was talking about. So I got used to just kind of like asking questions and listening. And that became a kind of useful skill. So anyways, at one of these events, probably about a year into the job at Sharesale, so now I'm like 24 months out from Queens, I bumped into this guy, Taylor Gehring. And this is kind of a weird situation because at the time I was getting really interested in, well, actually, one sec, pause. So this guy showed up in 2016. So I graduated in 2015, and then I moved to Chicago. And Chicago is a very political place, and they also really didn't like Trump. But I was driving around to all these little towns all around Chicago, which, if you look at the electoral map, it was kind of a strange place at the time because all of the things around Chicago are kind of Republican, and all the things around, well, in Chicago are very Democrat. So I was kind of like in a bit of a Democrat bubble. All the people that I knew in downtown Chicago were all very like liberal-minded people, like, you know, let's just call them Hillary people. So we had a lot of Hillary people in downtown Chicago, and then you get out of Chicago and all of these little factories out in Milwaukee and down in Davenport and all this stuff. This was all like kind of Trump country. And so I found myself at the influx of two massive political campaigns who were all basically brainwashing people. And the underlying, you know, you've got the people on television who are talking in mostly reasonable terms. They're not lying to each other as much. But the people that are on the ground often are not seeing that message. And they're reading a lot of blogs. They're watching Alex Jones on YouTube talk about how, you know, there's chemicals in the water or something like that. So these people were all very confused. And I had been going around talking to a lot of them out here, and that had already led me to a lot of confusion, which is kind of why I wanted to get into the internet, because it seemed like there has to be some information here. You know, there's like something is wrong with how we're handing out all this information to all these people. And so that had gotten me at one point, before getting into the crypto stuff, into the idea of looking for better and better information. So we actually built a Chrome extension so people could leave comments on the internet, kind of like a Reddit comment section, but for every page that you were looking at. It was one of my first web projects, just kind of practicing JavaScript, trying to get my head around it. And that project had led me to the idea that I needed to have some kind of a decentralized management system. And this is a thing called a DAO. So if you're not familiar with a DAO, they're called decentralized autonomous organizations. Oops. Lead ones. And basically what this means is you have a pool of funds, kind of like a company, that is able to have the ability to govern itself because it has rules that are written onto this thing called the blockchain. And I had kind of bumped into somebody at a meetup who told me about this idea. And so I started doing some research on it. And this kind of led me into the whole like going to crypto meetups, just because they had a lot of information about this stuff that I didn't have. And kind of this concept emerged around cryptocurrency because you have to have some kind of a decentralized coordination system. So blockchains in particular are very useful for coordinating DAOs, it turns out. And so I went to a lot of these crypto meetups and I was asking people all kinds of questions. Some people I was asking them how Bitcoin worked. Some people I was asking them how DAOs worked. And I ended up bumping into this guy, just totally off chance, Taylor Gehring, who previously was the CTO of Ethereum, which is crazy, right? So this guy who's like probably one of the top crypto people in the world just so happened to be in Chicago for a week, just so happened to be at a meetup. But I bumped into him and I asked him how a DAO worked. And he just kind of gave me this look because I didn't know who he was. And he, like everybody else in the room was like trying to talk to this guy. And I just kind of accidentally bumped into him and I was like, hey, do you know what DAOs are? Hi, I'm Al. I'm from Queens. I don't know what I'm talking about. And his response to this was to basically ask me what a DAO was. And so I gave him my best answer. And it also turned out at the time he was also a Trump supporter, just because he's a Republican. And so we got into a very deep political debate about why I thought we needed DAOs to police thought and prevent Trump from brainwashing the public. And so this became this kind of ongoing conversation for quite a while. And it ended up with us basically arguing about the technology for quite a while. And I didn't know what I was talking about at all, but I didn't say anything I didn't know. And I wasn't trying to, you know, showboat him or lie to him or sell him something. And so he invited me to come work for his YouTube channel. And this might sound completely crazy. So at this point, some of you might be a little confused because I started out as a robotics engineer and I had a great job working in factories where people were paying me lots of money to go and automate jobs, which is like a very useful use of my time. It's very tangible things that were happening. And then I went to go work for an affiliate marketing network, which sounds very sketchy by comparison. And now I'm quitting that job to go and work for a YouTube channel. And so my entire family thought I was crazy. Basically, everyone in my whole life at this point had decided that I was kind of a complete lunatic and that I was caught up in this whole blockchain thing. But we went and did this. And so we had this great, we had this great unicorn logo. So if you guys can see this, this is kind of what we started out with. So we had this little logo of a unicorn that said blockchain WTF under it. And we sort of just went wandering around asking people about crypto and then making videos about it, which is a pretty nuts thing to do for a living. But we got to do that for about, I think, like 6 months. And then someone realized that if it was a nonprofit, it would be a lot cheaper for Taylor to keep paying us all. And so he set it up as a nonprofit and we became a teaching institution. And so that company was called the Blockchain Institute, which we've now rebranded to weteachblockchain.org. And we basically had a mandate to go and research crypto for like 3 or 4 years. Pretty much spent all of my time during that period just going out and researching stuff and then writing courses. So actually, you can check this out if you come to the site. Some of the content's pretty mediocre because we wrote it like 4 years ago, but give it a look if you're interested. And there's a lot of kind of like self-led content that you can go through. Some of it's a little bit more beginner oriented. You guys are probably all pretty technical, but there's also some stuff on the GitHub, which you can get down here. No, can't get the GitHub down here. If you go GitHub, we teach blockchain. I think you get it. Yeah, there it is. So this site has a whole bunch of developer resources. Blockchain Institute Chai, that's what we called it. So I haven't actually looked at this in a little while, but there's a developer bootcamp on here, which is pretty excellent if anybody's interested. And I'd be happy to run like an actual workshop and teach you guys kind of the basics of it. But so we spent a number of years making a YouTube channel. And I only ended up kind of leaving the company about 2 years ago, roughly. And I started doing a lot of consulting work. I still contribute a lot and still teach some courses and that kind of thing. But this basically became sort of my main focus for a while, was running a YouTube channel. It was kind of crazy, but that's kind of how crypto works. And so the reason that I'm telling this really long backstory is because this is kind of how a lot of the entrepreneurial people that I know have ended up in the space. It's a lot more about trying to go and find something unusual that nobody else knows about and then get really, really good at that, as opposed to trying to become an expert at something that a lot of other people are already doing. And so if you can find ways to go and find something new that nobody else has looked at yet, then you can add a lot more value there than something where, you know, there's already 50 PhDs at Stanford working on it. At the time, actually, there were probably 50 PhDs at Stanford working on cryptocurrencies, but they didn't have access to Taylor Gehring and they didn't get to spend all of their time going and asking people stuff. The other benefit of this was that in our courses, I got to go and interview a lot of the courses. So when I wrote our course on IPFS, I went and interviewed Filecoin and asked them a lot of questions. And similarly, when we wrote our course on Ethereum, I had access to Taylor. And a few of our other courses basically resulted in me getting to go and just bug people, which is great. Because if you get to spend all of your time asking questions from really smart people, you will eventually learn an enormous amount of information. Okay, yeah, Matt's got some links in here, great. Oh yeah, and sorry, so somebody said the one that tried to buy the Constitution last week. So that is a DAO, yes. That one arguably is more like a kind of a weird art hedge fund, but that's kind of same kind of principle. The idea being that it has rules of its own and people will vote on what to do with it. And then I see Kyle said, did you use a framework or just straight up JS? So Kyle, was that about the Chrome extension or about the crypto stuff? Well, he can respond whenever he gets a chance. For the Chrome extension, there are a ton of libraries. So if you're ever going to build a Chrome extension, I would recommend getting the React boilerplate. React boilerplate, Chrome extension. This is also what I meant about being really good at Google. I always basically just type the word that I want. So this is the framework I want. Then I type boilerplate and then Chrome extension. And then boom, here's a fantastic Chrome extension with Webpack. This is pretty much what we do. And then we take this and we go copy paste this code over, fork it, and we start working. And then we spend, 3 weeks of sleepless nights working on it, and then we eventually end up with a prototype. Or I don't as much anymore. Nowadays, I mostly spend all my time sleeplessly trying to talk to investors, but it's kind of about the same difference. So anyways, we got a little distracted there. weteachblockchain.org became kind of this focus for a while. And what I realized was working there, though, is that there's like a huge gap with onboarding people to crypto, because you've got like products like MetaMask, which if you guys have used MetaMask, it's not really that great. So you've got kind of things like this that allow you to trade crypto, but you don't really have another better product. So what we wanted to do is kind of bridge the gap to onboard people. Okay, Kyle, yeah, cool. So crypto. Every single crypto project right now has their own JS wrapper. They also have Go wrappers. They have usually some kind of a C wrapper, but JavaScript is the easiest one to get them. almost every single project has a JavaScript wrapper because most of crypto is written as client-side apps. So in a traditional client-server model, right, you've got like the client, which is something that you view in a browser, and then you've got a server. And in crypto, typically you have a client and a blockchain. And we're trying to get away from having any servers at all. So like the point of Koi is basically that you have a client, a blockchain, and then a bunch of little Koi nodes doing microservices. So I guess I can kind of start getting into that direction a little bit. So I'll pop up very quickly on the Koi GitHub, which is kind of our pride and joy at the moment. I think we've written about 100 repos this year in the last 12 months or so. Yeah, look at that, 101 repos. This is our wonderful team, all kinds of fancy people with very funny looking profile pictures, a lot of us actually. My own is actually kind of ridiculous. This is a photo I took out in, where is this? I think Northern Illinois somewhere. Somebody took a photo of me on a train. It's an actual sweater I have. Kind of the point of crypto, by the way. If you get into crypto, do not wear a suit and tie for any reason. I have one on my LinkedIn profile for investors, but other than that, everybody gets very weird about it. I was at a conference last week and I showed up in a blazer, kind of started trying to network and talk to people. Everybody kind of like just looked at me. They thought I was a narc. One of the bouncers at the door almost didn't let me in because I thought that I was like there to bust the party or something. So kind of, hoodies are always the way to go. But if you want to wear pajamas every day for the rest of your life, get into crypto. It's fantastic. Sometimes it becomes difficult to find a reason to leave your house, but it's lots of fun. So what I will show you guys is the Koi task standard. So this is kind of one of the main innovations of what we created. And what it basically allows you to do is to have a trustless interaction with a secondary network. And what this means is like your crypto network can now talk to PayPal, or it can talk to Google, or it can talk to whatever you need it to talk to. And like, why would you want to do that? Well, the reason being that when you have a crypto client, you can host that onto decentralized storage networks. So like Arweave, Filecoin, IPFS, SIA, those are going to basically take your client, which is a file, and deploy it onto all these other computers. And that's really cool because it means now it's decentralized, it's immutable, cannot be taken down by anybody, and somebody can still access it. They can just call those networks, download the files, they got the client. But then what do you do for the back end of that client, right? Because having the client be decentralized just means that you have an access layer. And most decentralized apps at the moment actually just do this. So they have a decentralized client, and then they've got a decentralized blockchain somewhere with a smart contract on it. And then there's like 10 servers and a CDN that are just like globbed in there. And so somebody really wants to turn off that site, or if the guy who created the site just like stops paying for his hosting, then the whole thing just falls down and it's gone and nobody can access it anymore. And it's just basically not decentralized at all. And so the whole point of crypto was always that we wanted to build things that nobody could take down. So Ethereum, Vitalik Buterin, they invented this idea of, unstoppable apps. And it's a really powerful concept, particularly powerful if you're like a drug lord in Colombia at the moment. That seems to be what most of them are using it for. But in my personal opinion, I wanted to create something so that we can have a decentralized media network. So kind of coming back to the whole like Trump-Hillary thing, we need a way so that you can have fully truthful speech, or at least fully transparent speech. Otherwise, we're going to continue having like large news companies that just kind of intercept the information and tweak the little things so that they can sell more ads. And it's pretty much how the internet works at this point. Things that get prioritized on YouTube or Google or whatever tend to be kind of, somewhat favoring somebody, or they're usually not like fully censored or fully fact checked for the most part. I don't know if you guys saw the John Oliver episode from a few weeks back, but there's currently a massive disparity. So English language content gets fact checked, and then anything that's not in English, so Spanish, Filipino, like any language that is not English, basically doesn't get fact checked. And so you've got like a bunch of Alex Joneses running around in every imaginable language selling Viagra by lying to people. And it's just like, and they're not lying about the Viagra, they're just lying about all kinds of other stuff to get people to watch their shows so they can sell Viagra. It's an incredible business model. They're really, really good at it. But so circling back to this is why we need kind of decentralized trustless media, because it means you can actually see the newsfeed algorithm on all these sites. So we're trying to create a world where you can have competing social media platforms that all kind of use the same data set. So you have all the data stored onto all these decentralized networks, and you aggregate it all together into a newsfeed. And that's kind of that's the power of a lot of these systems. So what this is a very, very poor diagram. This is what happens when my engineering team is 20 people and my kind of marketing team is 4. But we try to make these sometimes because it kind of helps. So basically what we do with Koi is we take our developer down here who writes a very basic executable written in JavaScript, actually, which is really cool because you can import any NPM module that's already out there. You get your nice little executable file. It can be like 600 lines of code. And you create what's called a task contract along with it. The task contract has an audit mechanism and a distribution of a reward mechanism. So you write this like kind of logic of a game and this executable file so that nodes can play the game. And in fact, you can have as many executables as you want for each contract. So you can have like many different types of nodes that all interact together and provide microservices. So you take all of this together, you upload it to a decentralized storage network. So it's immutable, censorship-free, nobody can take it down. And then once it's on there, you register it to our main contract and you set a bounty. And you're like, hey, I want people to do this thing. Now go run this on your computers. And then everybody, if they want to run it, they stake some tokens, they run it on their computer. And then every time that their computer is running that executable file, the executable file is going to run back and it's going to interact with that smart contract and try to get the bounty, because that's the whole point, right? It's going to play the game and try to win. Then if anything bad happens, if somebody doesn't run the executable file properly, your smart contract can catch that and audit them. And other nodes are basically sitting there kind of like fishermen pulling and trying to steal that token back. And so we created this system basically so that you can have a completely trustless microservice where you don't have it running on any one computer, with the goal that eventually it runs on like little thumbnail sized things with a SIM card in them. We found a whole bunch of applications once we started doing this. It's kind of crazy. We started out looking at this for web scraping because we had a customer in Chicago. Another slight diversion, but at the same time while I was working in Chicago, I also started a small web design kind of contracting shop just on the side to make some extra bucks. And one of my customers for that, who was paying me on commission to just run his website. So he was like, basically, I have all these developers in other countries. I don't know how to manage them. I would like you to make a meeting with them every morning. And if you can cut costs for me, if you can automate some stuff, make it a little bit more efficient, I will give you half the difference. So I cut his budget down by a decent bit every month, and he kept giving me a little bit of a kickback. At the same time, he also realized, this is like at the beginning of COVID, all of his customers and all of his pricing were just like all over the place because supplies were out the door. So we had a huge problem with trying to keep the site up to date. He has about like 150,000 products. So we went and started scraping them for him. Just wrote a couple little web scrapers, very, very basic stuff, like not even really AI, just like, a little bit of Selenium here and there, kind of hop around a password wall, kind of grab some content, pull it out. And this allowed us to keep his site up to date. But it meant that we needed a whole bunch of IP addresses. And so we kind of set up this whole system, this whole Koi task thing, so that we could get IP addresses from people's phones so we can do this web scraping. But then at the same time, we realized it's really good for all kinds of other stuff. So we can go like fact checks and content. You can run GPT-3 and write content for people. You can do like thumbnail generation for NFTs. So like if you look at our site here, Koi.rocks, all of the thumbnails in this list view are, well, hopefully it works. I hate live demos. This is a beta site, so it might not. There we go. Okay. So this site is a whole list of NFTs running on the Koi network that somebody made. And all of these images, each of them, some of them are like 10, 15 megabytes because they're like very high res images uploaded by artists. And every single one of these images has to have a thumbnail for the list views. Otherwise it would just overload your computer. And so we get a Koi task where the node goes and grabs the NFT, downloads it, makes a bunch of different thumbnails for different list views, puts all those thumbnails onto IPFS, and then hosts them onto a REST API. And so every one of these nodes is actually hosting the content that shows up in this view. But it's behind a REST API and a CDN, so it's very, very quick and nobody even really notices. Working on decentralizing the CDN part, but we do one piece at a time, basically. And so this is kind of an idea of how this Koi stuff works. I did say I was going to talk about blockchain a little bit. So without further ado, I'll give some background for the people that aren't really up to speed on blockchains or what a task contract might be. And we're going to drink some coffee first really quick because I am talking way too fast for you guys. Hopefully this is slightly making sense anyways, though. Okay, cool. Tristan Harris talked about this topic a couple days ago on Joe Rogan's podcast. Very interesting. I'm not sure if you mean about the Viagra sales and that kind of thing, or about the decentralized truth, but yeah, a lot of Joe Rogan stuff. Joe Rogan loves this concept because he's kind of paranoid. And so every time that somebody tells Joe Rogan that everyone's lying to him, he goes on a rant, and it's fantastic. Love that show. Hey, I wasn't able to get my email through the Uber Eats thing. Can I be manually added? I don't know about the Uber Eats thing, sorry. So very quickly, if you guys are interested in blockchain, I'll kind of tell you how blockchain came to be. And this is probably the interesting part. So if you haven't been paying attention yet, you can actually follow along here. You can Google the Bitcoin white paper. And this is going to sound super stupid. It's like, how do I learn blockchain? Well, go read the Bitcoin white paper. Actually, the Bitcoin white paper doesn't ever say blockchain, which is kind of a weird thing. Most people don't realize this, but the word blockchain emerged after the creation of the Bitcoin white paper. Oops, that's not what we want. We want Control F. So Bitcoin white paper, and we type in blockchain. We get nothing, right? If you type in block, you get a few times, I think like 67. If you type in chain, another 27, yeah. So there's a few of these. They talk about chains of blocks, but they don't actually talk about a blockchain. So what's a blockchain? Why is a Bitcoin a blockchain? Many of you might know this. You're pretty smart computer science people. But the general gist of it is it has to do with asymmetric cryptography. So with asymmetric cryptography, you have a private key that can generate signatures that can be verified to match the owner's public key. This is like a very basic thing, but it basically means that I can control some asset by proving that I'm me using cryptography. And what that means is you can also have this thing called a timestamp server. And this is actually kind of what a blockchain is for the most part. It's a decentralized timestamping mechanism. So what that basically means is you have kind of intervals, and each interval you're going to lock some stuff into a hash. If you guys aren't familiar with hashes, a hash takes an arbitrary sum of data, creates one output, and then every time you change something in here, this changes. And so what that allows you to do, though, is it can create this kind of immutable chain of events where every single time that something happens, it's going to be tied back in. And if you change anything up here, all of this stuff changes, which really isn't that useful at this point. At the early Bitcoin stage, it wasn't. But the innovation of Bitcoin is this concept of proof of work. And so what proof of work does is proof of work allows you to have a competition to see who can add content to that immutable ledger. Because if you have a decentralized pool of people, the ordering and sequence of new events being added onto that immutable ledger can be complicated because somebody has to be elected to order the system. And so in Bitcoin, basically everybody sits around and they're broadcasting transactions, which are these signed payloads that are owned by the user. All of this content gets pushed out there all the time. And you're basically trying to take all of these pending transactions, which have all been validated, they all have valid signatures and everything, and then put them into an order that makes sense and add that to the chain. And this is this concept of a block. So you take all the pending transactions, you put them into a block, and then you add that block to the chain. But everyone's trying to do this at the same time, so you have to pick one person that gets to add the block to the chain. And so how we do that is this concept of proof of work. And that means you're basically going to keep running the hash algorithm until you get a certain number of leading zeros. So it's kind of like, I don't know. It's like one of those, like the big machines with the balls in them that they have for like raffles on TV or like bingo or something like that. You're just going to keep turning this thing until you get 4 balls that come out with a 0 at the front, which is crazy. And then every time that you do that, you're going to dump more pending transactions in, and you're just going to run this giant blender over and over again. And that's Bitcoin in a nutshell. Is you're trying to get a hash that has a certain number of zeros at the beginning, and you just keep changing this nonce value, number only used once, until you get one that's got a bunch of zeros. Once you got enough zeros, that's a block, and you just broadcast that up the network. And you're like, hey, I won. I think at the moment it costs between like $5 and $50 million of energy to add one block to the chain. And so you can lie to Bitcoin once, and you can lie to Bitcoin again, and you can keep basically wasting more energy than everybody else does, but it's going to cost you a lot of money, and you're going to add all these blocks to the chain that'll be invalid. And everybody else will be like, why'd you do that? And then they'll just ignore you, and then they'll go off and do it another way. And so Bitcoin's been attacked a number of times. It used to happen like every year or so, and then it started happening like every 2 or 3 years. Now it's kind of gone up, kind of like on a Fibonacci curve. And so now it basically doesn't happen anymore because it's just way too expensive, and nobody will ever even try. And so that's how this works. We're just looking for somebody who's going to sequence the transactions, put them on the end of the thing. And so the reason that I'm telling you guys all of this is because it's not very complicated. Like if you're a Queen's computer science person, you can figure this out. It's very, very simple stuff, actually. You could probably write Bitcoin in your spare time if you wanted to this weekend. I actually know somebody that did. He wrote a project called Arweave. He hacked it out, I think, in about like 48 hours, the first version. And now it's like a $6 billion network. And their only innovation was that they added in like a storage component into the Bitcoin chain. And it works. It works really well. We use it. Actually, that's where a lot of this content is hosted. So it's a decentralized network of computers that stores files. And it just basically uses the same algorithm. And now he's got a team of like 25 people, and they're having a great time. They just hang out in different countries and write code. So the reason I'm bringing up Bitcoin is because Bitcoin is the predecessor to decentralized media. So the second version of decentralized media is called the Ethereum white paper. There were a lot of different versions in between, but what Ethereum essentially pioneered, and Vitalik Buterin was, I think, 19 years old when he wrote this paper. So again, not complicated stuff, right? Like, you don't have to have a PhD. You definitely do not need to be a genius. You just kind of need to sit down and read what everybody else is doing. And so if you go through the Ethereum white paper and you search for blockchain, you will find lots of uses of this word blockchain. Because I think by this point, somebody who was writing one of the early Bitcoin clients had labeled a folder blockchain. And so everybody started using this word blockchain. That's kind of how that works. Like, somebody just picked an arbitrary word. So if we go in here, what you will find is this idea of a state transition machine. And so this is basically like a summary of Bitcoin. It's just like, hey, there's a thing, and we need to get to another thing by including more information. And the way that we get between those two states is this proof of work game. And so that's a big difference, because now he's regarding the Bitcoin system, which Bitcoin was meant to send money back and forth, but he's kind of defining it as a database, like a decentralized database where all the content is immutable. And this concept of a decentralized database becomes really important because this is actually the new value of cryptocurrency. That's like most of the new applications that are coming out are really around this idea of a decentralized database system. And so, oh, next workshop, cool. Okay, last thing for you guys. Come check this out. Read up on the concept of state transitions. There is one graphic here. This is what you need to read. Once you get through this, then there's Polkadot. Polkadot basically is my old boss's boss. They basically remix the same concept again. It's very, very simple stuff. Anybody can get into this. Thank you for your time, and have a great day.